So I'm fascinated with like greetings and like how different cultures say, yo, what's up? And so I want to share one of my favorite greetings with you. It's South African Zulu tribe. And here's how it goes. I'll say it. I'm probably going to say it wrong, but if you're from Zulu, like help me out. And I'll put it on the screen so you can see it, so you can like try to get a sense, and then we're gonna practice it, right? So when you would say hello to someone in the Zulu tribe in South Africa, you would say sawubona. You guys are awesome. Sawubona. Sawubona. You're probably wondering, like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean hello. I mean, they use it for hello. It technically means, I see you. I see you. And I find just the greeting fascinating on the one hand, because we've been talking about that this week, that like God's desire for us is that we see him the way that he really is, and we see him seeing us the way he sees us. And when I see him seeing me the way he sees me, I begin to see myself differently. And at some point, I begin to think differently about myself. At some point, I begin to think less about myself. And I usually begin to think less about myself about the same time I stop comparing myself to you or someone else or some figment of my imagination. And what happens in the progression of spiritual maturity is as I see God as he is, and then I begin to see myself as I am, which I guess John Calvin would have said there's two great knowledges. There's knowledge of the Holy One, and then that sheds knowledge on yourself. And that's basically what we're saying. But when I see him and then I see me, I can finally see you. But until I see God the way he is, until I see you for me. And I love sawubona because it means, no, I see you. But it means more than like physically with my eyeballs, I see your substance. It means I recognize you as a person and everything you bring to the table, so to speak. Like your gifts, your history, your pain, your scars, your successes, your uniqueness. Like when I say sawubona, I see all of you. Hello. Like, what would it be like if we could actually engage people like that? That'd be cool. Now, the response I find just as cool. So there's two responses. I'm only going to give you the one I like. The other one is just like yabu sawubona. Like, that's kind of boring. The one I really like, though, is you say sawubona, and then the respondent says skihona. Sawubona. Here's where it gets sick. Skihona means, because you see me, I exist. I know that sounds kind of like cryptic and like voodoo, but think about it though. When you walk into a room and like nobody pays you attention, when you walk into a room and you feel like they ignore you, when you walk into the DC and you're like, what do we say in our side? Do you even see me? Like, are you blind? Like, do I not exist? And it's just like, because you see me and who I am, I exist. But I think the other part of that, as I understand it, and I haven't actually talked to a Zulu tribe chief to flesh this out in real time, but it's because you see me and you see who I am, I will show up now as I am. Of God, because maybe we're the agents that God wants them to use to invite into the light, because we affirm them not just as they are, but who they are in him, and we see them as they are, and we love them despite themselves. Like my best friends and mentors, they're the people that saw the worst and yet somehow, amazingly, by his Spirit, could still believe the best. It's what we all want. And sawubona, skihona, like, you down? We could just say amen and like go home. And like we practice that, like world would change. But we're not going to stop. We've talked about this a number of times this week. Like he's like that my eyes would see him, that I'd be aware, that I'd grow in my knowledge. But when you read Paul, he often is like trying to help us to like look out beyond ourselves. And when you read Paul, like people mostly in Bible colleges and such, it's like we read Paul for the theology and like what Martin Luther brought down and like that I'm saved by grace through faith and that not of yourselves is the gift of God and all the great truths of God's sovereignty and God's this and that, and that's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. And Paul drips those things at certain places. but Paul saturates his letters with a few other things. Like these are paramount. Jesus is paramount. Don't want to minimize that. But when Paul talks about like our everyday living, like I don't know, it's like your grandparents. Like they tell the same stupid joke like all the time, and you're like, and they talk about the same thing, and you're like, man, why don't you just get over it? But like, no, they're not getting over it because it's really important to them. Like, what would be important to Paul? And if you read his letters, he has a similar format, and part of it is first century letter writing format, but he does some things that no other first century letter writers do in the way that he does it. But I just want to point out one thing that I would say is to Paul, maybe put it like this, it's a linchpin. You know what a linchpin is? I grew up on a farm, or around a farm, and my granddad, I remember one time, we're around the barn, and he's hooking up the tractor to the trailer, and the trailer's going to have lots of stuff, and the tractor's going to pull it, and then he pulls out this little pin. If you look in the wheel, you can see like a little metal pin. I'll show you another picture that probably looks a little bit more like it's that little piece in the middle that's got the funky, looks like an Egyptian cross without the cross, but you get it, that part. He's like, what I'm about to do is the most important thing I'm about to do. So he wasn't putting it in the wheel, he was like putting it in the hitch, and he had like, a little thing that went down, and it had a hole in it. He's like, I'm going to stick this in there and clip it, and he's like, this is the most important thing we're doing here, big guy, because without this, like, whoop, it comes out, and I can't pull anything. It's small, but it's holding all this together, and I would propose tonight, one of, maybe if not the, linchpin for Paul, outside of Jesus, no doubt, is prayer. And I make that statement because when you read his letters, like he can't stop talking about prayer. It's easy to miss, though, because it's only just a sentence here, but I'll give you just a sampling. Like in Philippians chapter 1, right around verse 3, he talks about how I'm always praying for you. And then chapter 1, verses 9 and 11, he actually tells them, here's exactly what I'm praying for you. And then chapter 4, 6 to 8, he's like, here's some ways you can pray with what you're going through about anxiety and worry and, that. If you go to Colossians chapter 1, around verse 3, he's like, we always giving thanks for you in all our prayers for all of you because of your partnership in the gospel, et cetera, et cetera. Verse 9 to 11, he's like, and here's how we're praying for you. What I find fascinating, it's similar to Philippians, but at the same time, completely different. There's some similarities, but he adds a few things to the Colossians prayer that doesn't show up in Philippians. So that's Colossians 1, 9 to 11. And then Colossians 4, 2, he's like, be devoted to prayer. Like, you should pray too, boys and girls. And then he says, but pray for me, pray for me, pray for me. Right? Colossians. See the pattern? Then you go to Ephesians, and he waits till like verse 15 to like talk about prayer, but then like 15 to 16, he's like, I'm praying for you, I'll pray for you a lot. Like, homie's on his knees like all day long. He's like, I'm praying for you, and then verses like 17 to 21, he's like, here's how I'm praying for you. And his prayer for those in Ephesus is different than Philippi and different than Colossae. And you're like, needed a lot of prayer. He's like, I'm praying some more stuff. And then he tells them more about what he's praying about, the height, the depth, the length, the width of God's love. And like they'd know the power of God that can blow their minds, right? That's what he's praying for them. And then you get to chapter 6, around 18, and he's like, you should pray too, right? You should pray too. So he's like, pray. And then he says, pray for me. Pray for me. Paul, apostle, caught up to heaven, seeing angels and pixie dust and whatever else was up there. Like he's preaching along, people fall out, die. He raised them from the dead. Like it's crazy. And like he's like, guys, would you pray for me? Would you pray for me? What I find fascinating is he doesn't just say pray for me. He actually tells, at least on 2 occasions, what I need you to pray for me. And it's different. So like in Colossians, he's like, would you pray that like God would open a door, and when that door opens for me to preach the gospel, would you pray that I speak clearly as I should? Just pray that I can articulate in a way that they get it. Pray God opens the door. But when he's praying, when he's talking to the Ephesians, he doesn't pray that or ask for that. He says, guys, would you pray that I could proclaim the word without fear? Which begs the question, is Paul struggling with fear? Is he struggling to step in fully at that season, at that place, whatever that was, to do what I don't know, I wouldn't be asking you to pray that I do it fearlessly unless like, hello, I'm got a little fear going on. And Paul is like, pray for me, right? See the pattern? So what I want to do tonight is I just want to look at one verse or 2 verses where Paul talks about this and just wrestle, like what could that look like in our lives? You down with that? I'm going to take that as a yes. You are yesing on the inside. Ephesians 6, 18 and 19. Paul says this, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, like always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Pray also for me, and then he's going to tell them how to pray for him. And I just want to look at these two verses, but we're going to look at these two verses like 6 different times, but each time we're going to just highlight a word, and then we're going to ask like, so how do I do that, boss? He just says, and pray. And so either he's just like, yeah, I said all that, and pray, or he's saying, you know, everything I just said, the linchpin to help you do everything I've said is prayer. So that whole, like, Ephesians 6, 10 to 18, give or take, like where like, hello, all hell is against you. There's a war going on. You think you're just upset with your daddy, but there's actually some demons up in there too. Like you thought this and that, but there's forces that are going on, and so you need to put on the whole armor of God. And for you to do that consistently in the world in which you're living, pray. Or is it just before that where he's like, yeah, man, sometimes it's just tough at work between masters and slaves, and sometimes like dads get a little harsh on their kids, and the kids a little get discouraged. You probably... and pray, or then there's the whole, like, you know, husband and wife, and that ain't jiving. I know all your parents are in marital bliss after how many years, but like some people struggle, and maybe Paul's like, yeah, and then the demons, there's this spiritual warfare that gets in that, but then pray, but it's not just all about demons, these other things, and so, and you got some unforgiveness, you probably, maybe prayer. And my contention is, and prayer. Paul's getting to the end of this letter, and he's wanting us to remember everything I've just said up to this point. Where the rubber meets the road will only be affected in our lives. Where the rubber meets the road in our shoes is with prayer. And then he's like, and you're like, whew, well, that just pumped me up, boss. I mean, I feel really condemned because I don't actually pray that much. But he says, and pray in the Spirit, which we'll come back to that, on all occasions. And it's not just like 24/7, though 1 Thessalonians 5, 17 and 18 kind of push into that. But it's on every different situation or scenario or time frame or season that emerges. Like that is a palatable moment in your life for prayer not to be the last response or the last resort, but the first response and the first resort. And Paul's like, pray in the Spirit on all occasions, on every... What? All kinds of prayers and requests. And maybe there's different types of prayers that actually are more beneficial for different types of occasions. And that's, I think, why Paul says pray in the Spirit, so that I'll actually have discernment to know what the occasion and what type of prayer, because if not, I may pray the wrong prayer. And you're like, how could you pray the wrong prayer, right? I'll give you an example. I had a mentor back when I was like 23. I just gotten married, and he was a pastor, and he says, hey, Jerrell, I want you to go with me on a trip. So he took me on a trip to New Zealand, as a ministry trip, and I'm just carrying the bag. And as mentors do, they like just, I don't know, they take every life stuff and bring it like, whoo, in the moment. And he's like, hey, I got this woman in my church. He's like, but she'll come in my church, Jerrell. And I tell you what, she comes in late, but she usually comes in early enough to like stake her claim. And so she'll put her stuff on the very back row on the corner aisle, and then she sits there. And then once the music's done and I start speaking, she does one of these. She pulls it out in the aisle to her eyeball to eyeball. And she said, and he's like, I'll be preaching my best. I'm giving it the best Jesus talk I can give. And just when I think, Lord, I'm saying what you want me to say, she'll cross her arms, and he says she will nod her head like that ain't right. And she's in the back and side. Nobody can see her. And he's like, I just want to slap her in Jesus' name. He's like, and I found myself, Jerrell, like, why does this woman, Lord Jesus, why is she at my church? Would you bless me with her absence? Right? He's serious. He's like, and then he's like, Lord. Like, that woman, she pushes my buttons. And he said, Jerrell, when I said that to God, it's as if the Holy Spirit spoke to me with greater clarity than I've ever heard in my life. And he said, son, that's the problem. You have buttons. And I put her in your church to push those buttons so you'd realize you have those buttons, because if you do not deal with those buttons and what's behind those buttons may cost you your ministry someday. And he said, I was praying the wrong prayer. I went up to her next Sunday and I gave her a hug. I gave her a kiss on the cheek and I said, I'm so glad you're here. He's like, I'm praying, Lord, cast her out. And the Lord's like, no, I brought her in. That's the wrong kind of prayer. And Paul's like, I want you to pray in the Spirit, because there's occasions that you're going through, and if you don't see them with the proper discernment, you're liable to pray something that just ain't right. I know that ain't good English, and I said it with a Southern accent, but you get the point, right? And so Paul says, but pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers. And then he says these next few phrases, and this is what I want to focus on the most. He says, with this in mind. With what in mind? I don't know. Everything, I guess. With this in mind, some people are struggling to stop anger. Some people are struggling to stop lust. Some people are struggling to get out of bed with the person they shouldn't be in bed. Some people are struggling with the anger. And he deals with anger in chapter 4 around verse 26, two different ways. He deals with the exploders and the imploders, you know what I mean? Some people, they just let you have it. And other people, they just bury it, and then they explode. But we have our tendencies. And he's like, but with this in mind, like some people are going with that. And then there's this whole spirit. And then there's families, and families are just tough, and relationships are tough, and work, that just kind of stinks unless you get a job that you do that you love. And that's actually the best way to live. And then there's a spiritual. He said, but with this in mind, with all this in mind, okay, be alert. Why do I need to be alert? Because what we just said, I need to know how to pray. But the word he chooses for alert, it could have been translated like vigilant, which I don't really know what that means. I mean, I don't use that in my daily. It could be like be aware. But I think the word is better understood as a word picture. The literal word picture in the Greek, and then the correspondent in the Hebrew would be to watch, or more specifically, a watchman. And so I believe Paul is drawing on this agricultural first century Jewish reality, in that everybody's got a farm, right? Old Testament, everybody's got a farm. Family's got a farm. Multiple families are going to share this farm. They may have a little terraced area if they're living on a hillside in Judea or something. And somewhere in this little cluster of shared farms, they have what's called a watchtower. Watchtower. So this will be a replica of like an Iron Age, Old Testament time watchtower. It's in Israel in the Judean mountains, and they would have had watchtowers like this in this place. And so you got like your little hole in the middle, and so that's like a good place to take a siesta. But if you wasn't taking a siesta, it's cool in there, so you'd put your tools in there. You could store your tools in there, so you don't take them all the way back home. You could put crops in there, so you could put like some grapes or olives in there if you weren't quite ready to process them, but you didn't want them out in the sun. And so you could put stuff in there. But what the watchtower mainly was for was, I'll just state the obvious, you can call me Pop, and their job was to watch the garden, if you will. If there's a fox, it's like watching for like animals that come in to like steal, like rummage through, or you're watching that crazy neighbor Larry that like sneaks over and steals your grapes in the afternoon. So you're watching for either somebody to come, something to destroy, or someone to guy in the watchman tower's job to like make sure everything's capiche. That same concept shows up in Iron Age, biblical Old Testament time cities, where the cities are surrounded by a wall. And then where the main gates are, there could be several, but main gates are, they would have a built-up area, look kind of like that, but it's usually square. And then you got, Watchman William, that his job is to hang out up there, and he's just like watching for people that are coming. And it's said that the watchmen, they're so skilled, they could tell where you're coming from, like I know where he's from, right? Just the way you walked. Or the way they ran. So like King David one time, and he's there, and there's a watchman up there, and they're like, hey, somebody's coming. And he's like, well, who is it? And he's like, I don't know, but he runs like Ahaz, son of son of Zadok. I think it runs like that guy. Like he's the guy that runs like that. Like it's that guy. Like or in 1 Kings, a place called Jezreel, there's a watchman. He's like, somebody's coming. They're on a horse, and they're like, who is it? Who is it? He goes, I don't know. They're too far. I can't say. But they drive like Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a crazy man. Like I don't know how that boy is like riding his chariot all over the place. But they're like, it's like your dad. Like it's that guy. Like they recognize the guy because of his reputation of how he drove a horse and chariot. I just find that hilarious. My point is, these watchmen, they are skilled at who's coming to be like, close the gate, they're not for us, or like, open the gate, they got some good apples or something, right? And their job is to protect the city and the people in. Tracking? I know what you're thinking right now. What in the world does this have to do with Ephesians and prayer? We're getting there, trust me. That concept of a watchman got then synonymously applied to a group of people that weren't farmers. It got applied to a group of people that didn't take care of the crops or defend the city, but a group of people who were responsible for watching over hearts of the community. They're called prophets. Like sometimes you'll see in Isaiah, they're called seers, and you're like, what in the world is a seer? Like S-E-E-R, seer, or it'll say the watchman. I've stationed watchmen on my wall. Like, may the watchman give him no rest until he answers and brings peace. And you're like, are they like up in a tower? No, it's just metaphorically. But spiritually speaking, the prophets are supposed to be like looking into the spirit and seeing the hearts of the people and crying out to God about those hearts of the people and speaking to God, his heart to them. They're to be caretakers, in a sense, of the people's hearts for one another. Watchmen. In the Hebrew Scriptures, as well as in the New Testament, this concept of a watchman often is tied to prayer. So like Jesus would be like, could you not watch and pray? That there's this and Paul, I believe, is saying be alert. It could have been translated watchful and prayer. He's pulling on this image. He'll do the same thing in Colossians 4:2, be watchful and devoted to prayer. Are to be prophetic. What do I mean? That God has called all of us to be spiritually sensitive and alert, not just to how he sees me, not just of his activity in my own world, but as I sawabona my brothers and sisters, that I'm alert to God's activity in their life or the need in their life. And Paul says, with this in mind, with what in mind? We're in a battle. And sometimes I'm struggling to fight for myself. We're in a battle, and sometimes I'm struggling to discern, is this God's voice or the serpent's voice or somebody else's voice that was a bad version of God's voice, but I can't, and with this in mind, like there's a struggle within me to get rid of who I was, to step in to there's a battle, and sometimes I don't know if I can go, and Paul says, with this in mind, like be praying, but then he's like, but you ain't only the object of your prayers. Like, I think we should juice up the prayer personally for ourselves. But Paul is like, keep with this in mind, be alert and always praying. But then he's like, and always praying, not just for yourself, but for all the Lord's people. I think what Paul might be saying is that you and I, let me put it another way, you are always an arm's length away or within earshot of someone on this campus or at Walmart who is struggling desperately. You are never without eyesight unless you're locked up in your bedroom, and then you may be the one that's struggling. And I believe what Paul is saying is the people of God who are seeing him as he is, that can now see themselves as he sees them, that understand he is forming us into his image, now can look up and look around and be like, come on, Jesus, I would have helped set somebody else free. Because that's where you're at work in their life, and they are struggling, and they are fighting, and they can't struggle anymore on their own. And so you have charged me to be watchful for them, to stand in the gap for them when they can't stand in the gap. Because, hello, I know when I'm in that place, I really wish somebody would have done that for me. I know I'm a little charged up right now. I'm not angry. Do you feel me, though? Like, Paul is like, you are in a battle. And I don't want to over-spiritualize it like there's demons everywhere, but there's demons everywhere. I don't want to over-spiritualize it like there is an enemy who has forces that want to wreak havoc on your soul and your And we don't have to get all weird and stupid about it, but I think Paul's like, dude, be alert and pray. And so what I want to give you in just a few minutes, and then we're going to practice, is what are some practical ways you can be alert and pray for others. And so just a couple of principles of posture, and then a couple principles of like practice. So number one, just be alert. Just be alert. And to be alert, to me, it's just a posture. Okay, my eyes have been closed, my head's been down, but like Lord, I'm open now. And to go with that is, Lord, ask God to prompt you. Like, God, I admit I'm usually self-consumed and thinking about myself and how I need to study, as you should study, and you should be concerned about what's going on with your wherewithal. But God, I don't just want to, that too, I want that. So asking God to prompt me now provokes a little bit of expectancy. Because here's the truth, like when I ask God to prompt me, then I actually am a little more susceptible to see when he prompts me, because we see what we look for. Like my daughter, she's 17, she's a senior in high school. She saved up a bunch of shekels last summer working, and she bought a car. But like she didn't know what a Ford Mustang is. She just wanted something to roll, but kind of pretty, I guess. So I do what you do. I get online, I find a car. It's a GMC Terrain. She didn't know what Terrain was. She couldn't even spell Terrain, but like I'm like, it's a good price, honey. We're gonna go check it out. And so we go check it out, and it met her little, her little cute self-approval. And we drove it home. Again, she couldn't even spell Terrain, but she named it Terran because we all name our cars in my house. And so she named this GMC Terrain Terran. Again, she doesn't know Camaro or Mustang. I know some of you boys are like, how could she not? I don't know. You're probably not going to date her, right? And so she named it Terran, right? And like 3 weeks after that, not too long ago, we're driving downtown, and then we go to a restaurant, and we're walking back, and I'm like 50 yards from the car, and I'm like, hey, look, babe, that's Terran's brother. And she's like, Dad, that ain't his brother. That's his cousin. That's the Akeda. It's actually bigger than the Terrain. And I'm like, and we'd be driving down the road. She's like, Taryn. You would think the whole world is full of GMC trains. Now, some of you are like, I'm going to need to Google that. They ain't got no idea what that looks like. Right? But she can spot them all. Why? Because she now drives one and she looks for them. We see what we look for. And the same principle is true with God. That when I say, God, I'm going to ask you to prompt me, the more our eyes begin to open and we become more sensitive to the thought, to the nudge, the feeling, to the recognition that God may actually have something for me. Thirdly, need courage to wake up, or maybe they're struggling, or maybe they're doing awesome, or anything in between. But I'm just going to begin to pray, and they don't need to know it. But then number 4, sometimes it actually is helpful to tell them, bro. Like I've had people call me at key times in my life. They didn't know what was going on. They'll be like, send me a text, hey, bro, give me a call. And I'm like, well, what's up? And they're like, man, I've been thinking about you like every day. And when I think about you, like I feel blank, and I've just been praying for you. I just want you to know I'm praying for you. And I'm like, you have no idea. Well, apparently they did because the Lord told them, right? But this idea that there's courage when we just say, I've been praying for you. And don't get weird and crazy, and like you don't have to be all like silly Pentecostal about it. I mean, Pentecostal ain't bad, but like just don't be stupid. But tell people, like send them a text praying for you, but don't just tell them that you're praying, like here's what I'm praying for you. I got a neighbor, he's a pastor, and a couple weeks ago I go for a run right by his house, and as soon as I like walked past his house, like my heart just like, whew, like sunk. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. But I felt like, no, I actually need to pray for him. Something's going on with him. And so I'm running and praying, and I just texted him, hey, bro, came to mind, this is what I was praying for you. It wasn't like you're going to move to Mozambique and like get a different wife. It wasn't anything crazy, but it was just, here's what I'm praying for you. And I gave him 3 specific things that I've been praying. And like next day, he stopped me and he's like, whew, I had a tough board meeting. I had this going on. Thank you. And what's the point? You just respond by praying for them, and then you send them a prayer. You tell me praying. Fifthly, pray then and there. Pray then and there. What do I mean by that? Let me give you a good example. It's been a few months ago, probably a little over a year ago, before we moved from Texas to Michigan. And my daughter, who's now a senior, she wasn't a senior then because we were in Texas, but she plays water polo, and she needed like new swim gear and goggles, and I guess that's just what you do. And so I take her, I'm a good dad, so I take her to Dick's Sporting Goods. And so we're lingering, but like I don't know, I just don't like sitting there watching my daughter like hold up swimsuits. And so like I do what every dad does or every man does. I just find a spot and sit down and just kind of like do one of these. So while I'm minding my own business in the middle of Dick's Sporting Goods, this dude like walks around and he kind of like he does one of those, and like I speak a lot at the church where I was at, and so I figured that's usually like code language, like you've been found out. I mean, I'm short, I'm white, and I'm bald, and 92% of the community was Hispanic. Like I stood out like a little dude, and so he kind of walks up and he's like, "Are you that guy?" And I'm like, "Which guy?" And he's like, "The pastor." And I'm like, "That's me." And homie was like ripped, like he had muscles, then he had like muscles coming out of the muscles, then he had like tattoos on top of the second layer of muscles, and he got like 3 pairs of like looked like Jordans. I'm like, "Bro, you gonna go broke up in here?" And I'm just like, "What's happening? How you been?" And he's like, and then I slow down. I'm like, "You good?" He's like, "No." And he starts talking about how his mom passed away. He's angry at God and hadn't been to church in over a year. I never met the guy in my life. I didn't know who he was. But like and I'm like, and we're sitting there and big boy, like he's like, eyes are getting all red. And he's like, "Hey man, would you be praying?" And I felt the whole time like the Holy Spirit was saying, "Pray for him." Like here and now in the store, Dick's Sporting Goods. "Hello, boys." Like, pray for the dude. And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't really want to do that. I mean, I'm in Dick's Sporting Goods. My girl's going to come back soon." And he's like, "Hey, would you be praying for me?" And I'm just like, "I get you, Lord. I get you. And I said, "How about we pray now?" And he like drops the boxes. I mean, big boy. And he's just like holding his hands out like we were in like a little kumbaya prayer meeting. I mean, we're in the middle of Dick's Sporting Goods, like on the aisle. He's got his hands out, and I'm just like, "Bring it on, Lord." And so we're praying. And my little daughter, she got her swimsuit right, and she's like, "Hey, Dad, I'll be back." You know, she runs away and we're just praying, and he's crying, and there's a puddle. What's the point? Like, I just felt prompted, and he was open to it, and I said, "Let's do it," and just do it then and there. Could be in the cafeteria, could be at Walmart, could be at Starbucks, could be at the fishing grounds, could be you're just walking across campus, and you're like, they smiling, but why do I feel like that? And you may not, hey, just pray for them and keep going to class. But there are times, I think, where you're having a conversation, and they allude to something, or you sense something, you're like, "Can I pray?" And just do it then and there. Don't be stupid, but like bless the socks off of them. How do you pray? We'll end with this, and then we're going to pray. How do you pray for somebody when you don't know? When you don't know how to pray for someone. Number one, just pray for them a greater awareness of God's presence and activity in their life. Like, I think since I'm supposed to pray for them, like, man, Sean keeps coming to mind, but I don't know how I'm supposed to pray for Sean. I guarantee you Sean would be up for that prayer. Just God, give him a greater awareness of your presence and your activity. If he gets that, he's going a long way. And so I don't know how to pray, but that's a pretty good thing to pray. Secondly, you could pray, "God, I pray for an increased passion and intimacy with God." That's not bad. Number 3, I pray for a fresh desire and engagement in Scripture and prayer. Like, you ever not been like, "Whoo, I can't wait to read my Bible and talk to Jesus in prayer." Sounds good, but I just don't always do it. Like, if somebody felt prompted to pray for you in one of those seasons, like, would you like a little umfo in your buko? I mean, I don't know what that means, but you know what I'm saying? Lord, like stir up a desire, and you're like, "I want to read my Bible and pray." I don't know why. It's because they're praying for you, doggone it. That'd be awesome. And then number four, pray for that person's relationships and spouse. That's not that you get one or they get one. I know what you're thinking. But some of you, I found out you're young, but you're already married, so let's just go ahead and pray for their spouse because, Lord, they need it when they're still in school. And so you're praying for relationships, like if they got a honey and a bunny. You're praying for spouses. You're praying for their parents or just something, but you're just praying that this person would fully utilize their God-given gifts and abilities on campus, at church, at work, at community, and etc. I guess we could say, what am I saying? Lord, I don't know how to pray, but I just pray you help them know your presence is with them. I don't know how to pray, but I pray that you would wake up them to see how you're at work in their life. I don't know how to pray, but I pray that you would just stir up a fire and a hunger for their word and to pray. I don't know how to pray, but I pray for these relationships. And what I've discovered when I begin praying these things, I don't know how to pray. God is really good about directing me to one of them, and it becomes the main thing. And God is really good when I just get the wheels on the bus going round and round. He's really good about pulling in the parking lot and be like, booyah! That's what you pray for. But if I don't know what to pray, these are all pretty good things to pray. I mean, Philippians 1, 9-11, Colossians 1, 9-11, Ephesians 1, 7-21, 3, 14. Those would be good. I mean, Paul's prayers would be good to pray over somebody too. But if I just start with these, and God will lead us from there. And any of us can do that. And all of us need it from someone else. And there's always someone within our sphere. I guarantee you, if you open yourself up to this, I guarantee you, there'll probably be few days that we walk across this campus that we don't see someone in the caf coming in, going out, in a class, a professor, a worker, where Lord, I just pray you stir up hunger. You don't have to stop and be silly, but there may be times you should. But it's just, God, I don't know what's going on. You don't have to. Just be obedient. He's good at the rest. And I believe for Paul in a community to thrive, this is what helps it do it. And I want to be a kind of guy that does that for those around me. And I pray you can be that for the kind of people that are around you. And as we do that, all of heaven will break loose. So what I'd love to do in a few minutes that we have left is maybe, if you're up to you, you can stay seated if you want, and you could probably be dismissed if you want. You could hide in a corner if you want. But if you're willing, I would ask you, get with 2 or 3 people, maybe at least 3. If you want to stick it with the dudes and the dudettes, that's cool. That's cool too. Don't ask them what they need to pray for. And don't get weird, but start here. And just pray that and let God lead your prayer out of that as a blessing over their life. Well, I don't know what to pray after I do that. Then pray what you wish somebody was praying for you right now. And there's a good chance you'll hit close to home there too. So would you stand with me? I'm going to say a quick prayer. Team's going to lead us just in some background music, but then get in groups of 3, 4 max, because I want everybody to get prayed for. And then just practice praying out loud for somebody else. So God, may we be alert. May we be awake. And as may our simple words that flow out of our mouths to others' ears, may your Spirit reach deep into the hearts of people in this room.